This happened to me about 11 years ago while walking home from a friend's house at night. I'll just get straight into it. I used to live in a rural part of the UK, and have lived in rural areas most of my life, so I was used to long walks, occasionally at night, especially before I could drive. They never bothered me too much. I'd get creeped out occasionally, but this one night was the most terrifying experience I ever had. There was this one friend who used to live roughly 3 miles away from my house. He had cool parents and my other friends, and I would often go over his house, play video games, and hang out. Occasionally, this meant walking home at night if I stayed late. There were 2 ways back from his house. One was the roadway, which was about 5 miles long, and took about 30 to 45 minutes. The roads were very quiet and eerie sometimes, but they were lit by street lamp, so it never bothered me walking this way. The other way was a shortcut through some woods, which took off about 2 miles, and the wooded bit was about a mile long. I often favored the wooded shortcut and have probably walked it over 100 times. The woods were dark, however, combined with the lack of ambient light due to living in a rural area. You had absolute abyssal darkness. Luckily, most of the time I had my phone light to walk with, but sometimes my phone would die, or the battery would be so low, the flash wouldn't work and I'd have to use my screen light. As you've probably guessed by now, this was one of those occasions. I remember my friends and I had just finished watching a film. It was nearing 10 p.m., so we all left my friend's house and headed our separate ways home. I contemplated briefly which way I should choose, and decided to take the shortcut through the woods. I started walking away from his house and towards the path that headed into the woods. The street lights dimmed as I entered the fields before the woods. I glanced at my phone and saw my battery was really low, only enough power left for a couple of minutes of flash, and then I'd have to use my screen for light, and that wouldn't last the whole way either. As I saw the tree line approaching, I switched on the flash and followed the well-trodden path into the dark. To my dismay, my light died within seconds of entering, and I flipped my phone over to try and shine the way using the screen. As I walked, I looked out for all of the familiar landmarks I was used to seeing, to ensure I was heading in the right direction. Funky tree stump, check. Half-fallen fir tree, check. Enormous puddle I had to jump over, check. All was going well so far. I was halfway through the woods when my phone completely died. I remember the moment it happened. I was engulfed in darkness. I'm not sure if you've experienced this level of darkness before, but it was so dark, I couldn't even see the outline of my hand, centimeters in front of my face. Naturally, my pace slowed considerably, and I started holding my hand out in front of me, to make sure I wasn't going to walk into a tree or something. I continued walking for another minute or so, until all of a sudden a pungent smell hit me. Cigarette smoke. I glanced around but couldn't see anything. Then I heard it, a cough. I wasn't alone. Thoughts raced through my head. Who would be out in the woods in the dark? Are they following me? Am I lost? I quickened my pace again, throwing a little caution to the wind. I carried on walking and tripped slightly on a branch. As I regained my balance, I heard another sound. Branches breaking underfoot, what sounded like right behind me. The snapping turned into fast footsteps that grew louder and louder. I started sprinting. I felt the well-trodden path turn to brush. I felt branches, logs and plants hitting my legs. It wasn't long before I fell hard. I was lying on the floor, holding my knee. I could still hear branches snapping around me and a voice muttering something. I didn't dare move. Then all of a sudden, they turned on a torch. I couldn't see anything except for the beam of light, which seemed to be eaten quickly by the darkness of the forest. I lay motionless on the ground as the beam swept through the trees. I could still hear the person mumbling, a deep growl. The crunching of footfalls grew and grew. They were only several feet from me by this point. I couldn't breathe. The light went out, the snapping of branches grew, and then, nothing. Absolute silence. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't see anything. Then, I could hear wheezing. Right above me. I wanted to cry. I wasn't sure if the person could see me or not. They could have been staring right at me and I wouldn't know. This carried on for about 5 minutes until the crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs started up again and got fainter and fainter as they moved away from me. I remember lying down for another 5 or 10 minutes, contemplating my escape. Like an idiot, I would ran off the path, but I wasn't sure which way was back to it, or was home. I didn't really care. I thought I was going to walk in one direction until I left the woods and get home from there. I knew as soon as I started moving again, if the person was still in the woods, they would hear me. So, should I run, or try and sneak out? I opted for the latter. I slowly rose to my feet, listening constantly to my surroundings, picked a direction and started walking. I wasn't perfectly quiet, but quiet enough to be sure I wouldn't be heard from too far away. I kept hearing snapping sounds and rustling in the distance, and every time I froze, I'd hold my breath, until I was happy no one was there, and then start walking again. I repeated this pattern for what felt like an eternity until eventually I found the path. I screamed for joy in my mind and sped up my pace. After another 10 minutes I saw it. Light. Street lights filtering in through the trees. I'd never been so happy to see a meager street lamp. But as I progressed to the end of the woods, my heart sank. At the end of the path was a black silhouette. Unmoving, contrasted against the light background, was the dark figure of a man. What should I do? Maybe it's a different person. Perhaps it's someone walking their dog. I froze and watched them silently, but they didn't move at all. They just stood there like they were guarding the entrance to the woods. I didn't know what to do. By this point, I'd had enough. I was so close to getting out, I decided to just run straight towards the exit, straight towards them. I was a 6-foot young man. If they wanted to stop me, they'd have a hard job of it, I thought. So that's what I did. I started sprinting. The figure grew and grew, and as I reached them, I stepped to the side. I heard someone growl loudly and felt something clip the back of my head and tug the back of my jacket. I cleared the sheep gate in one leap and sprinted into the light. I eventually stopped running when I could see the first house and looked back. The entrance to the woods was quite far away now, and I couldn't see anyone standing by the entrance. Relaxing a bit more now, I finished my walk home. That's pretty much it. I know I could have overreacted. It could have been someone out for a walk in the woods, a dog walker or camper. But what I thought was strange was that they didn't use their torch except briefly on one occasion. Once they heard me, they also actively seeked me out. Who knows what would have happened if they caught me? In any case, I never walked that way home alone again, not at night anyway. When I was a university student in New Zealand, in a big country town, I was boarding with another girl, Cheryl, a woman from Holland. It was a very green, pastoral area, and lovely, if you enjoy the peaceful countryside, and life in a more rural area. I was doing photography and went into town to buy a camera. I'm not kidding, but the shop assistant just gave me a camera and didn't take payment for it. He just gave it to me and did none of the usual procedures when you buy something. He just stood by and let me walk away with it. Maybe country salespeople do things very differently, but I wanted that camera, and if he wasn't going to serve me properly, I was just going to go off with it. I've heard of people shoplifting because sales staff ignores them or no one comes to serve them. Maybe he was deliberately setting me up as a shoplifter. Some people take bizarre dislikes to people because they stand out as coming from somewhere else, and try to set them up or spread rumors about them. This has happened to me. Anyway, I just walked off with the camera, seeing he had just given it to me with no further action concerning taking payment. I have walked a lot since a young child, and so, I walked very fast then. If the guy in that shop intended to track me down on foot to apprehend me, he had a steep task ahead of him to catch up. Anyway, as I walked home, I was aware of a man who seemed to be purposefully following me. It wasn't a main city thoroughfare where lots of people walked along in the same direction. He noticeably seemed to be following me, and there was nobody else around. I don't remember now if it was the guy from the camera shop or a policeman. As I approached my landlady's home, I was beginning to feel rattled, but I didn't slow down. But I was beginning to feel really frightened as the guy was still following me. He was long way behind though, as he couldn't catch up and suddenly fell back feeling tired. His pace slackened off as if he were tired, and he suddenly walked off somewhere else. Who knows? Maybe he had decided, if I could walk like that, I might do him injury if he tried to assault me. I have no idea if he was deliberately following me. But it seemed like he was. He definitely had his sights set on me and was walking at a fast pace too, but far behind me. He could have been letting me get ahead for the fun of suddenly catching up when I got tired, but he was the one who was winded and fell back. Anyway, it was a good camera. This actually happened walking from home, but when I was around 12 years old. I was sleeping over at a friend's house on a Friday night. We had gone to the same elementary school for a couple of years, but her family had moved across to a new town and she was then attending a different junior high than I. This would have probably been fall of 1974. So, we were hanging out at her house, but started feeling bored, so we asked her parents if we could walk to the local high school to watch the football game through the fence. Her home was maybe 4 to 5 blocks from the chain-link fence near the end zone of the football stadium. In those days, walking such a short distance in the evening at the age of 12 was absolutely not considered a big deal. So her parents let us go and we were out soon. As we were walking along, chatting away, we were passing an apartment complex that took up the whole final block leading to the school. We passed by a sort of hedge and from my peripheral vision, I became aware that someone had stepped out of the bushes and was following us. I didn't think much of it at first, as we were so near the school, right next to an apartment complex, and it wasn't even all the way dark yet. But it started feeling like they were getting closer, so I kind of nervously looked over my shoulder. There, walking very fast and gaining on us quickly, was a completely naked man. I whispered to my friend, "A streaker is following us." We started to run, and he ran after us. When we got to the fence by the football field, he grabbed me and pinned me against the fence. I was screaming and my friend had run back across the street to get help from a man just getting into his car. She was begging him for help, but he slammed his car door in her face and drove away. Meanwhile, the naked guy was rubbing himself against me and grabbing me while I screamed as loudly as I could. Suddenly, he let me go. I screamed to my friend, "Run." And we did. We ran back to her house and told her parents what had happened. We were both crying, shaking and terrified. They called the police, who came to the house and asked us questions about what had happened, semi-inferring that we were somehow to blame and probably exaggerating. They questioned us not only in front of her parents, but with her 14-year-old brother present. So when they asked where he had touched me and if at any point I thought I was going to be raped, I said no, because I was embarrassed. Although my parents tried to follow up with the police several times, we never heard another word about it. The whole experience was extremely traumatizing. Looking back now, I think the guy was probably tripping or something, but who really knows?